Hello, viewers. We are recording this in the first half of January 2025. So I can officially be allowed to say a very happy new year to everyone. We are actually on to a very good start this year. And the reason is because Randy Bean, who is our guest today, is a very well-known data and analytics leader, very influential in the space. He just released his 2025 survey of data and AI leaders. This survey, by the way, has been going on since 2012. Oh, there you go. Amazing. Thank you. So since 2012, he's been doing the survey, and I've been voraciously reading his findings every year, but I never knew the backstory. So today we get to talk about what's new in 2025 survey, how did it all start, and I am so glad that Randy, you took some precious time and you're talking to us today. Thank you so much for coming on to this show.
I'm delighted to be here with you today, Sanjeev. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Randy, let's get started. Love to get your introduction to your background and what role you play.
Sure. I'll try to give you the short version. Basically, I started out in industry, and though I never studied this stuff, I was trained as a COBOL and assembler programmer. So, kind of from day one, I learned how computers worked, and I was working for a major bank, Bank of
Hmm.
Boston, now part of Bank of America. But I was much more interested, I was less interested in the programming and I was much more interested in the stuff that you moved around, which was the data. And I
Hmm.
remember saying to some of the leadership at that time, I said, wow, you amass all this information on your customers and their purchases and their preferences. What do you do with all this information? They said, the regulators make us hold on to it for 7 years and then we can throw it in the furnace. And I was just astonished. And that really was the start of my career. So ever since then, I've been pursuing how organizations can use data to be smarter and more effective in their business operations. I worked for a company that was a pioneer in database marketing, now known as CRM,
Hmm.
in the late 80s and 1990s for a number of years. I went out to Silicon Valley in the internet era and did two venture-backed startups, including Kleiner Perkins company as a co-founder. And in 2001, when all of that came crumbling down, I started up a boutique management consulting firm. I used to describe it as a little McKinsey, but we were advising Fortune 1000 companies on how to leverage data and analytics and later AI to be smarter in their business decisions. And worked with about 38 Fortune 100 or 200 companies. Our largest clients by volume of business were Fidelity Investments and American Express and Wells Fargo and MetLife, organizations of that kind. And along the way, as data gained in prominence, I was invited to start speaking and writing on the topic. So I wrote for the Wall Street Journal for
Oh,
two
wow.
years, 2014, 2015, on big data, because there was this fascination with big data, and have continued writing ever since in Forbes and Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Review. And during the pandemic, I consented to write a book. So I wrote the book, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data and AI, which really was a cumulative kind of history of what I'd learned over 3 or 4 decades in the business.
It's quite amazing. If I go to an event and I run into some CDO, invariably, if I mention your name, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've known him for 25 years." It, so you have you built such an amazing network. Is this your first book, or have you written a few more?
Unlike my colleague Tom Davenport, who's on like number 27,
Yeah.
it's kind of, I've written one, and maybe in the next decade, I'll write a second.
Oh, the next decade started today. So, yeah, yeah. I'm very curious to get, like I said, the backstory of how did you get started with the survey. So today we'll talk more about the survey. So, Randy, if it's okay with you, like I have a few questions on the survey itself before we go into the findings from the survey.
Sure.
What was the impetus or the catalyst to this survey?
Well, I'm not a data scientist and I'm not a researcher either, but for years I was hosting a series of executive roundtables of Fortune 1000 leaders. In
Hmm.
those first decade, it was primarily CIOs. Since then, it's become primarily chief data officers.
Hmm.
But in 2012, a group of the chief CIOs said to me, we'd really like to get an understanding of whether this thing, big data, is something that we really have to pay attention to. Would you mind doing a survey? Because we'll all participate. So that really kicked it off. And it's always been a very curated, invitation only, exclusive survey in
Hmm.
the sense that it's targeted to the most senior C executives that have responsibility for data and AI in the largest companies. So I reach out to about 300 to 400 executives. This year, 125 companies participated. So it's very senior, high proportion of
Hmm.
participation, but it's not mass market research type of activity.
And what was the response in early days? I'm curious, what kind of questions did you ask then and now? How has the survey changed?
Yeah, that's a great question because the survey's really evolved over time. It
Hmm.
started off very specifically, mostly around data, because that was the primary mandate of the chief data officer. And then over time, it incorporated analytics. And this year, it's largely focused on AI. But much of it has been around data and analytics and AI leadership and how that's evolved. So I think one of the key findings that I continue to cite, it's one of the pieces of information that has been consistent over the years, is I simply ask, has your organization appointed a chief data officer? And the first year the survey was conducted,
Hmm.
12% of organizations said that they had.
12.
And
Wow.
this year it was a record
Oh my God.
84.3%. So it's pretty much become ubiquitous. And by the way, it was only in 2017 that was the first year where that number exceeded 50%.
Hmm. So is that, are there particular types of companies that have CDOs and others don't? Or what's your finding on that?
Well, the composition of the survey in terms of the participating companies has evolved over time. So early on, it was very heavily concentrated in financial services. For example, in 2021, roughly two-thirds of the participants were financial
Oh,
services.
wow.
But I've tried to diversify considerably over
Hmm.
time. So this year it was 40% in financial services and heavy participation, for example, in healthcare, life sciences, about 17%, retail consumer goods, about 13%, and then another 30% across industries, technology, manufacturing, telecommunications, aviation, automotive, energy, food and goods, media and entertainment, among others.
And geographically, how your respondents distributed?
Yeah, this year in the past couple of years, there's been an evolution or a migration to bring in a greater international audience. But this year was a significant increase. Like last year, it was 92% in North America and 8% international. So still a small representation internationally. But this year, it was 85% North American, 15%
Hmm.
international. So I collaborated on the survey this year in partnership with Data IQ, the
Hmm.
data and analytics and AI leaders community, and they were very helpful because they're UK based in terms of opening up their UK and
Ah.
European colleagues to respond to the survey. In addition, in September, I did a keynote at CDO LATAM in Lima,
Hmm.
Peru, and that provided an opportunity to invite a number of Latin American CDOs to participate.
But you're not trying to make this into a massive survey, right? You want it to be curated. Do you have a one-on-one relationship with all these C-suite leaders and you call them, or is this more like statistical survey that's sent out?
Yeah, it's a personalized email, an exclusive invitation to each
I
executive
see.
This
Okay.
year, 97.7% were C-level executives that responded. 91% held the title of Chief Data Officer, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, or Chief AI Officer. Another several percent were CIO or CTO, and a couple CEOs or Chief Operating Officers. And it's personalized to the degree that if there's companies that have been respondents for many years and within a couple of weeks I don't get their response, I text them, call them, I say, hey, need you to respond. And
Hmm.
people, because they view it as a benchmark of their peers. And so really by participating, they're learning from one another.
For the 2026 survey, when would you start? I'm trying to get an idea. How long does this whole process take?
Yeah, those are great questions. I literally start around November 1st and end
Oh,
around
okay.
December 1st. So it's pretty much 4 weeks. And it's interesting this year because a couple of people responded back to me in early December and said, oh, here we're ready to respond to the survey. And I said, I closed it last week, but I had a record level of participation. So I wanted to start aggregating the results and organizing it and writing about them and publishing them.
Wow. So November, I somehow I thought you'd say like first quarter, but I'm sure, like, as hypothetically for next year, do you already see, or how do you understand? Oh, there are new questions to be asked, or we need to change this. The landscape changed dramatically. Everybody is talking these days about AI agents, for instance. So I would guess that will have some impact on your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Once I think of it as once the summer ends and the second half of the business year begins
Mhm.
right after Labor Day or early September, I start to think about the survey and what the content should be.
Hmm.
I mean, I think this year, roughly 35 to 40% of the survey was brand new.
Oh, wow.
In the introduction or invitation, I described it
Hmm.
to people as a reimagined survey because I kind of shifted the emphasis, but I also kept a number of the baseline questions so you could have those metrics from year to year. But I think about it in September and October
I
and
see.
then start executing on November 1st.
That is super refreshing to hear that 35 to 40% questions were reimagined or were new. Uh, I know I'm dragging you back into the memory lane, but I'm also very curious about data quality. When you started, how important was data quality then? And the reason I'm asking is because it just perplexes me that we've been trying to fix data quality issues for decades. Ever since I've been in this industry, we've been talking about it. What are your perspectives? Like, why is it so hard? What was going on then compared to now? Have we improved or are we still muddling around?
Well, that's interesting because this year I did not ask that question,
I
but
see.
last year I did. And I didn't ask it because I was looking to ask questions where there was maybe some significant variation.
Hmm.
Last year, I asked whether data quality continued to be an impediment to organizations being successful with the data and AI initiatives. And I believe it was only 37% said that they felt they were in a good place from a data quality
Oh,
perspective.
wow. Okay.
So, roughly 63% said that data quality continued to be an impediment. I didn't ask it this year because I didn't expect a big leap.
Yeah. Yes, I wouldn't expect a big leap, but I'd be very curious to hear your point of view on why data quality is stuck, but you can mull over it. I know it's a tough question because it's like if we had the answer, then we won't have the problem. But for some reason, uh, I'm ready to go into the key findings, but if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, just make two comments. And my friend and colleague Tom Redman, that's
Hmm.
what he spends 99.9% of his time talking about. But I remember back when I was on the technical side of things and doing something, this was back in the database marketing days called householding. So you got a complete
Yes.
the customer. But one of the challenges was that the customer's name, particularly businesses, were captured, maybe in 16 different ways for the same organization. So you really had to tweak the code to be able to identify what the
Hmm.
business was. So that's continues to be a challenge because often the data is captured, say at that time it was often with clerks. So data, it's the whole thing about garbage in and garbage out. So if you have some of your least highly paid workers who are collecting the data,
Mhm.
sometimes you pay the price later on when you're trying to get the greatest quality data that you can.
Amazing. That's great. All right, let's go to the survey. 98% of respondents reported increasing investment in data and AI initiatives. Can you delve deeper into the reasons for this near unanimous response?
Well, I mean, the real question would be what's going on with the other 1.6%?
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's almost like you should expect the answer to be 100% because I'm not sure data and its application and its use in AI because it provides the foundation. Without great data, you don't have great AI. So it just seems like a fundamental baseline of what organizations could and should be doing. Last year, 82% said it was they were increasing investment.
Hmm.
This year it was 98.4. So there's clearly a universal recognition. Also asked last year, are investments in data and AI a top organizational priority? Last year, 87.9% said yes. This year, 90.5. It's nearly ubiquitous, but not universal. But the piece of the question that most interested me was that asked, and very pointedly asked, we said, has interest in AI led to a greater focus on data? And 93.7% said yes. So this is really, the spotlight's on data now. I've lived through cycles. I remember back in 2008, 2009, I was working with all these data groups that had built up within large companies, and they're all excited. And they were saying, we're going to transform the organization. And the financial services
Hmm.
crisis hit in companies. The major banks were firing 30, 40, 50,000 employees, and a lot of those data groups were wiped out. So for many organizations, there was a partial restart. But right at this moment, where 93.7% say that AI is shining a spotlight on data, it's really a great moment in time, and hopefully we can take advantage of it.
Randy, I can see why, almost every company now is investing into AI. I was going to say heavily, but I won't say that. So they're investing into AI. But at the same time, we saw in 2024, actually, all since 2023, we've been facing a lot of economic headwinds. Companies have been, reducing their budgets. So where is this investment coming from? Where's the money coming from?
Um, well, yeah. So, that's a tricky question. I guess the way I'd answer it is that organizations, obviously there's a lot of talk about AI. You can't avoid it.
Yeah.
But I think organizations have come to the realization that it is fundamentally
Hmm.
transformation. But at the same time, if you look at the Fortune 1000, 90% of Fortune 1000 are legacy companies, which means
Hmm.
they've existed for more than a generation. And they don't have to compete with the Metas or the Googles or the
Correct.
Amazons or Apples. They can compete with the other 90% to be successful. And
Hmm.
also, they have to be cautious in that they can't afford to put at risk their customer franchises that they built over many years. I remember Facebook a decade ago had the motto, move fast and break things. I mean, if you're Bank of America, you can't really afford to break things. You have to be
Yeah.
cautious.
Yeah.
So when I talk to organizations, you read about all of the progress or all of the efforts or all of the commitments organizations are making to generative AI. But when you speak to the individuals within these companies, for the most part, they describe that where they're at is at an early stage. But I want to make 2 points here.
Hmm.
One is that this year, roughly 76% of companies said they're at an early stage in terms of their generative AI implementation efforts. And when I say early stage, they describe this as experimentation, testing, planning, and design are implemented in limited production. And 23.9% said that implemented generative AI in production at scale. So, it's only a quarter. However, when we asked that same question last year, it was only 4.9% that
Hmm.
had implemented in production at scale. So it's really a five-fold increase in terms of organizations in production. So even though it's still a minority or a quarter, a lot of progress from last year to this year. And I think that we're likely in 2026 to see another significant jump.
That is amazing. So we are starting to see a lot of AI projects being put into production. I get this question a lot, by the way, from people who is doing AI well. Like, are there companies that you can mention, for confidentiality's sake, you are not? Like, I'm just curious, like, which companies are shining in this space today?
Well, it's a little tricky to answer that, and it's not because I don't want to, but I write a series of case studies in Forbes,
Mhm.
averaging about one a month. Recently, I wrote about Citibank. The past few months, I've written about Verizon, Capital One, Kroger, Vanguard, Exxon Mobil. And so I asked them what they're doing in terms of their AI initiatives, and they tell me, and I write about it. And then afterwards, some people say, wow, that's pretty amazing. Are they really doing that? And I said, well, that's what they said. So, unless you're there on the front lines, it's often hard to fully verify. But, a number of the organizations are undertaking initiatives and they're talking about those initiatives. And um, as a matter of fact, a year ago, I wrote about Ally Financial, and they wanted to be very precise in sharing what they were doing. So they were doing a generative AI initiative, and it was in the second phase, and they wanted to share their results, and it was something like a 62% increase in productivity for these five tasks. So some organizations will quantify the benefits in terms of productivity gains that they're achieving.
It's interesting. Actually, you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly the problem I was trying to bring up here, where I tell people, I read your case studies and I'm like, look, Citibank did this and Kroger did that, and they're like, yeah, but we're not convinced. And so I think we still have a little bit of skepticism in the market, and it's only increasing because everybody wants to talk about AI agents as the next big thing, and we still haven't won over. So I feel there's also a little bit of fatigue now in the market where there's too much of bombardment of AI this, AI that, and people are questioning what's going on. So.
Yeah, and I'll add that in after generative AI was introduced, I got to get my years right here because they passed quickly. In the fall of 2022, in a year later, so during the course of 2023, people were saying like, I had two sets of people that came up to me. One that said like, wow, AI, it's like magic. It's going to do all these magical, transformative things. And I was kind of like, oh, just let's take it one step at a time. And then I had other people coming at me saying, like, AI, that's really evil. It's going to destroy mankind. It's going to create all kinds of disinformation. And I was like, oh, just we'll see. But I attended the Wall Street Journal Tech Live event in October of 2023, and it's a fairly small group, and Sam Altman turned out to be the keynote. They also had folks like Mustafa Suleiman and Fei Li, and I came away completely bought in, and bought in the sense that not so much that AI was good or bad or whatever, but that AI was going to be transformative. And it was a tool, like any tool that could be used in a
Correct.
variety of different ways, but it was evolving so quickly, the power of machines and the power of computers to learn from data that the impact was going to be widespread, it was going to be transformational, and it was going to be, from my experience in business, the most transformative technology since the internet a generation ago.
In your survey, Randy, by the way, this is so well said. I love what you just said. I have the same feelings about AI. The survey also highlights there's a struggle in establishing data-driven cultures in the organizations you talk to. Can you elaborate on that? And what are the gaps that are stopping people from becoming more data-driven?
Yeah, there was a series of questions that asked for many, many years. And this year I just asked two of those
Hmm.
questions because I figured those were the most important. But I was saying, are you competing on data and analytics? Is your organization leveraging data as a business asset? And the responses were always generally low. So, but the two key point, the two questions that were most interesting that I've monitored over time is, have you created a data and AI driven organization? So in 2021, less than a quarter, 24% said they had. And it continued to be just about a quarter every year until last year,
Hmm.
2024. And out of the blue, it jumped to
Wow.
48.1%, doubled. And everybody said, well, is that an aberration? So
Hmm.
this year it was 37.3%, kind of split the difference between what it was for years and what it was
Yeah.
last year. So I'd say that there was a optimism now about the ability to truly create a data and AI driven organization, but that was tempered a little bit by the same challenges that data and AI leaders have faced for decades, if you will, and a lot of those relate to the fact that, unless you're delivering business value, unless you can
Mhm.
come to specific business outcomes, it leads to disappointment. I don't know how many business leaders that I speak to over the years, be it like data warehousing or data marts or data mesh and data fabric, and they say, oh no, not another data project.
Hmm.
There's that image or that veneer that organizations have invested for years, decades in data initiatives with this promise of a magic bullet that hasn't resulted. So there's a skepticism, a healthy skepticism in a way that if we're going to invest in these initiatives, they need to deliver business value. Sometimes to audiences, I make the statement in part to force them to think, but I say, if you're not delivering measurable business value from your data and AI investments, I suggest you go and shut them down this afternoon.
Hmm.
And it's
I
not that I would advocate that, but it's that,
Yeah,
you really
yeah.
need to have that mindset.
This reminds me of data governance initiatives. So many of my clients have failed data governance initiatives that they know they need it, but they like, it's a banned word. Let's not even call it governance. We are so burnt out. Let's call it data enablement or data intelligence, but not governance. Have you come across such cases?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I had my business before I
Hmm.
sold, we had a data governance practice, and a
Hmm.
few years ago we started calling it data enablement because data
Ah,
governance just had this punitive effect. It was
yes.
kind of like, we're going to lock everybody down and have them follow a series of rote procedures, and
Right.
it wasn't something that engendered enthusiasm.
Yeah, yeah. It's also changed from being defensive to now offensive, right? Like now the whole notion of governance or enablement is to unlock the potential of data, make it discoverable in a secure manner, as opposed to we're doing it for Sarbanes-Oxley. If we don't do it, then we get fined. So,
Yeah, and if So when the chief data officer role was first established, and it was largely established with major banks, and it was a outcome of the financial services crisis of 2008, 2009, and happened to have a firsthand seat because Citibank hired one of the partners in my firm to be their first enterprise chief data
Oh,
officer.
wow. Okay.
So it was, we got to see him in this role, and then other organizations started to ask us, what should the chief data officer be? But at that time, initially, it was purely a risk and regulatory function to make sure that there was greater accountability in terms of the data reporting so that companies didn't get into the same situation they did in the financial services crisis where there wasn't accurate financial reporting. But over time, naturally, there was the impetus to move to more growth and business generation and customer supporting type of activities. So one of the questions we ask each year is whether the role in your organization is largely offensive or defensive. And
Hmm.
in as recently as 2020, 54% of the organizations said their focus was only, well, 54% said their focus was on offense and 45% on defense. And this year, extraordinarily, 80% said they were focused on offense. So there
Oh,
really
wow.
has been an impetus. And I think that that's
Yeah.
clearly driven by AI. And by the way, just one anecdotal point, I remember back in that 2010, 2011, 2012 timeframe, there were many people that I knew that were data professionals
Hmm.
that they got their funding for major data initiatives that were essentially offensive under the auspices of this was a risk and regulatory project that they were working on. So it was justified because the organization needed to do it for risk and regulatory purposes. But
Hmm.
then they said, we're going to use and run with this to build out new capabilities so that we can capture data in a way that we can learn and start being more predictive.
This is fascinating stuff, and I'm so happy to hear how there's a reimagined way to look at data as an asset rather than the liability. Has this thinking, this massive jump you've seen, changed the way CDO's reporting structure is? Like, who do they report to? CDO tenure used to be very short. Has that changed? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, several thoughts. And it's interesting because Tom Davenport and I have collaborated in writing the forward for this report for many years, and we agree on everything except for one thing, and that is where the chief data officer and data and AI leadership should report.
Hmm.
And it's funny because we were interviewed last week for CIO magazine, and we're going to be interviewed at the same time, but I was interviewed first and he was interviewed second. And I gave my thing about believing it should report into the business. And then I read this morning his thing. He says, oh, well, Randy thinks it should report to the business, but I clearly think it should report to the technology organization. But this year, there's been a significant shift. So this
Oh,
year, and it's over time, if you go
yeah.
back a decade, most chief data offices reported to the CIO.
Hmm.
In this year's survey, 36.3% reported to business leadership, either the CEO, the president, or the chief operating officer. Another 47% still reported to technology leadership, but still 36% is pretty significant to top business leadership. And the backgrounds of the data and AI leaders is also evolving, and I point to two examples. So Capital One, their current chief data officer, Amy Lenander, her previous job is she was president of Capital One UK for 5 years. So a true end-to-end P&L business line executive. Uh, at Visa, their chief data officer, they just got a new one, but a few years ago they appointed one and he gave me a call, and I've known him for many years. And he had run lines of business, retail, consumer banking at places like Fleet Bank, personal investments at Fidelity Investments. And he called me and he said, guess what, Randy, I've been appointed chief data officer at Visa, and you know as well as I do that I know nothing about data, but I know everything about the business and I know how to build an organization identify the experts, and build a team that can make sure that data is integrated into everything that we do as an organization. So I'm seeing more and more people come from that kind of background as opposed to the subject matter experts. And I think that that's a trend.
This is fascinating because President of City of Capital One UK becoming CDO, uh, some years ago it would be inconceivable because president is such a senior position. But what I'm understanding is that the CDO is at the same level now. I mean, hierarchically.
Sure. Yeah, it's part of the C-suite for many organizations.
Hmm.
Written and done a lot of work with Colgate Palmolive, and their chief data or chief AI officer. She actually has an interesting title, Diana Schildhaus. Her title's Chief Analytics and Insights Officer, and reports to the president of the organization. So, it's manifesting itself in a variety of ways, and I think that the more that the role is embedded and integrated into the business leadership of
Hmm.
the organization, the more
Hmm.
impactful it is.
Amazing. What is the tenure now of CDOs?
Yeah, I have written about that quite a bit over time, and asked the question this year again. Asked it in several forms, whether the role is successful and well established. I can get to that. But the average tenure this year, we asked, is the average tenure in an organization under 2 years? 24.1% said yes. So under 2 years, and then under 3 years, 53.7% said yes. So, Tom and I have written about the average CDO tenure being between, 2 and 2.5 years, and that seems to be consistent. I know with many of the major banks who are among
Mhm.
the first to hire chief data officers, a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I used to say they're on their sixth or seventh person in that role now. By now, it's about their 10th person, because
Oh,
that's been 15 plus years.
yeah. I saw you and Tom Davenport published in MIT Journal. I also saw there was a report from Harvard Business Review. They also do a report on your survey, correct? Mm,
Yeah, every year, working with Harvard Business Review, we publish a findings, a summary of the survey and the principal findings.
I see. There is also new roles that keep coming out. So we had CDOs first, then it changed to CDAO because analytics was brought into this remit in some companies. Now AI has been brought in, so there's chief AI officer. And what's the transformation happening between CDO and chief AI officer?
Yeah, well, interesting this year for the first time asked, has a chief AI officer been appointed within your organization, and
Hmm.
should a chief AI officer be appointed? And I was actually astonished that 33.1% said a chief AI officer or the equivalent has been appointed within their organizations. Um, I know, for example, Capital One, I spoke about their chief data officer. Well, they in the past year appointed a chief AI officer and
Hmm.
their peers and colleagues. As I was writing an article about Cleveland Clinic in September, they announced the appointment of their first chief AI officer. So more and more organizations are appointing chief AI officers. But I'll say this, a year ago at this time, I participated in a 2-day event in Boston, sponsored by the Northeastern University Institute for Experiential AI. And the first day was billed as the 10th Chief Data Officer Summit, and the second day was billed as the first Chief AI Officer Summit. So I did a keynote panel on the first day, and then came the second day, and somebody said, so this is the first Chief AI Officer Summit. And I said, well, actually, the first one was in 1964, but
Yeah,
like I get all blank expressions,
yeah,
like nobody understood the context. But
yeah.
what happened was in the Chief Data Officer Day, there was a lot of grumbling in terms of like, we're not appreciated, we're not understood, we're not valued as much as we should be. Here's the challenges we face. And on the chief AI officer day, it was all green fields, a blue sky. And I turned to the chief data officers that I was with, and I said, I have an easy answer to your problems. Just call yourself a chief AI officer, and you'll have a 3-year runway
Yeah.
where you just have goodwill and nobody's pushing you and challenging you in terms of, what's the business value that you're delivering. So it's great that organizations are appointing chief AI officers. And I expect that they'll have a runway for a couple of years, but
Yeah.
then there'll probably be the same levels of accountability.
I can foresee there would be a lot of sparks flying between CDO and CAIO because data is considered to be not the sexiest thing, although we know how important it is. AI gets so much attention, but we'll see. So. So moving
Well,
ahead,
yeah.
there's so much you have in the survey. I need hours, so I'll just keep it short because there's some really important things that stood out for me. One was the fear of job losses due to AI. So I want your views on that. And the second is 96.5% of respondents feel the overall impact of AI will be beneficial. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One is one of the things that surprised me the most was the degree of techno optimism,
Yeah.
which I think is good and should be that way, because it was, I'm looking for the exact numbers here, but it was roughly 98% of executives that were very positive about what the future of
Hmm.
AI hold. And there's the book Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and it really talks about, it's important to keep a human in the loop, but look at opportunities where AI can augment your job. So if you really approach it from that realistic mindset, I think that there's everything to gain and nothing to lose. But we ask questions about delivery of measurable business value from data and AI investments, and also the primary business value created by AI and generative AI, and productivity gains were seen as the area of greatest opportunity and liberating knowledge workers from the more mundane tasks, as well as improving customer service and experience. And then the greatest fears were around spread of disinformation.
If we look at history and take that as a guide, when personal computers came into existence, I think there was a Time magazine article that 90% of jobs will be obliterated with the advent of computers, personal computers. But in reality, we know hundreds and hundreds of millions of jobs globally have been created since then. So, but when I mention this to some people, they're like, yeah, but you don't understand. AI is different because AI is intelligence, so it's competing with humans. So we don't know how this will pan out, but I think the fear of job losses is overstated. But as time will tell. So with that,
Yeah, I do too, because I go, yes,
go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
sorry. Well, I just think from an augmentation perspective, it can actually free people to do the more creative, thoughtful tasks. I joke to people sometimes because there's various people I speak to that have a very basic understanding of AI. And I say to them, I look forward to a future where I can say, hey, AI, do my taxes. Hey, AI, do my accounting. Hey, AI robot, mow my lawn. And I
Hmm.
can, focus on synthesis or creative ideas.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. What are some of the milestones you are most proud of since you started the survey?
I think we're living in a moment of change. I mean, change is something that happens throughout history, but I think that we are living in an era where there's more and more data available, greater computing power, And it's not the technology limitations, it's the human limitations in terms
Mm,
of how rapidly people can incorporate these capabilities into their day-to-day job functions or, their ways of living. So in a way, I believe that my 4.5 decades in industry, I've been a witness and experienced this evolution. And I think in many ways I'm a proxy for Fortune 1000 companies because I'm
mm,
not somebody that when new technology comes about, I can't wait to use it. Rather, I'm kind of cautious and I poke at it a little bit. And only when it becomes evident to me that there's a benefit do I adopt it. So often people will come to me and say, oh, here's these shiny objects, but I maintain a high degree of skepticism. Often something doesn't get on my radar until I've heard about it from enough, if I've heard about it from enough Fortune 1000 mainstream organizations, I say, there must be something to this or something to take a look at because it's not just, say, the leading edge people that are talking about something.
yeah. I want to thank you for your tireless devotion to the space and laying the path forward for so many people and all the inspiration. So thank you for everything that you've done in this industry. I'm very curious, what advice would you have for listeners who are looking to build their careers in the data space?
I think it's all about change and transformation. And I think it's very important for everyone, if they can, to take the long view, not
Mm,
expect things to happen overnight, but rather you can be hopeful, but you also need to understand that people, organizations, processes, they only change at a certain pace, and you can help move that process along, but you have to work with people. People are the ingredient that ultimately means whether something's going to have an impact in an organization and industry or not.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. One last question. What are some of the hobbies and passions you have outside the world of tech? I'm curious what are some things that the rest of the world does not know that you can share with us?
Well, I do enjoy traveling, but I also, for a number of years, have been involved in a international writers and residence program that
Oh,
I've
wow.
been the chair of. And we've hosted National Book Award winners, Pulitzer Prize
Hmm.
winners, even a Nobel Prize winner in literature. And that's based out of Stonington, Connecticut, I should add. Sometimes I say Stonington, Connecticut's a peninsula. The next peninsula over is Watch Hill, Rhode Island. So when I look out to my left, I see Taylor Swift's house right over here. But yeah, working with writers, and the writers think of me as the business, or some people think of me as the business person that writes, and other people think of me as the writer who is a business
Oh,
person.
wow.
So
So
it's two
interesting.
different worlds.
Yeah. And you are neighbors with Taylor Swift. How cool is that? I think you mentioned that you've seen some of her celebrity friends, or your kids have seen them roaming around, or like trying to run into your boat, you know.
Yeah, we have always swam, and my kids surf, and they surf right. This was before she bought her place a dozen years ago, but they always surf from that spot, and then they bought the place, and then they'd have the security guard. So when we take our boat over and go swimming now, like last summer, I jump off the boat and I see them looking at me in the binoculars, and then I see a boat come in and it comes encircling ours, and it was actually Taylor Swift with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. I didn't even know who these people are, but my kids were looking up on Instagram or whatever and saying, "Who's with her this weekend?"
Oh my God, how interesting. Maybe next time we can invite her over to your place and we can do a podcast with her and get her views on how's AI affecting celebrities. It's got to be it's affecting everyone. So, but with that, I really want to thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone will be very very much helped by all your thoughts. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Sandeep.
sharing.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. See you, everyone. Until next time. Bye.